Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Imagine hitting the Earth's atmosphere at, 25,000 miles per hour, completely surrounded by a cocoon of plasma that's burning at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that is not a gentle ride.
No, not at all. And that is the violent, just gritty reality stamped into the scorched hull of the Orion spacecraft, which is just one piece of data from a massive dump of 12,000 images that NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, just released to the public.
Right.
So welcome. I am so thrilled you're joining us today. If you're listening to this, you're going to want to buckle up. We are taking a deep dive into a stack of reporting today from outlets like Ars Technica, the BBC, Science Daily, and Al Jazeera.
It's a huge stack today, yeah.
It really is. And, it all points to one undeniable fact, which is that the parameters of human existence are shifting right under our feet. I mean, we're looking at everything from deep space metallurgy and quantum mysteries to geopolitical fault lines and actually the biological code of aging itself.
It is a profound moment to be observing the world, honestly. And I think those Orion images you mentioned are the perfect entry point. Because when we talk about space exploration, it's so easy to get lost in those pristine, CGI-like animations of what a mission should look like.
Oh, absolutely. The shiny white rockets and the perfectly clean suit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But that photo of the charred Orion hull from the Artemis Distant mission, that is pure, brutal physics. I mean, ablated heat shields work by intentionally burning away.
Which is wild to think about. You're writing in something designed to disintegrate.
Yeah. The material absorbs the extreme thermal kinetic energy of re-entry and just vaporizes, which carries the heat away from the crew cabin. So releasing 12,000 raw and processed images, it isn't just about PR, it's an open source goldmine.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because I've always wondered about the strategy there. I look at 12,000 photos and think, well, that's just a massive transparency flex from NASA. But you're saying it actually shifts the scientific process.
It really does. It crowdsources the analysis of our next step toward Mars. Material scientists globally can literally just look at the asymmetrical scorch patterns to understand exactly how atmospheric friction behaves at lunar return velocities.
Wow. So anyone, anywhere can help figure this out.
Exactly. Because the engineering required for a sustainable Mars mission, it just cannot be siloed anymore. We need metallurgical data to build ships that don't just survive one re-entry, but can handle deep space, atmospheric entry on Mars, and then eventually an Earth return.
And it seems like we were completely rethinking how we even get to those planets in the first place. Like Science Daily had this fascinating report on the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, down in Pasadena, California, United States. They just successfully tested a new electromagnetic thruster.
Yes, the lithium vapor test.
Yeah, lithium vapor. It doesn't use standard rocket fuel. It uses this lithium vapor, and it runs hotter than molten lava.
I read that and immediately thought of a magnetic levitation train, like a maglev, but for deep space. How does a lithium vapor thruster actually work? Well, the maglev analogy captures the magnetic aspect, sure.
Yeah.
But we really need to factor in the sheer state of matter we are dealing with here. Traditional chemical rockets, the ones we've used since the Apollo era, they are basically controlled explosions.
Just lighting a massive bomb and riding it up?
Yeah, pretty much. You mix liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, they ignite, and the rapidly expanding gas shoots out the back. It's brute force, and it requires massive, incredibly heavy tanks of fuel. But the JPL thruster operates on an entirely different paradigm. It uses ion propulsion.
Okay.
So they take lithium, which is relatively light, and they vaporize it. Then they ionize it, meaning they physically strip electrons away from the lithium atoms, turning the vapor into a plasma.
So it's essentially a soup of charged particles.
Precisely. And because those particles are charged, they can be manipulated by intense electromagnetic fields. The thruster uses these fields to accelerate the lithium plasma out the exhaust at velocities that just completely dwarf chemical rockets. And because the plasma is burning hotter than molten lava, the energy density, what aerospace engineers call specific impulse, is astronomical. You get vastly more thrust per pound of fuel.
So for Mars mission, what does that actually mean for the astronauts?
It means you don't have to spend 9 months coasting through the vacuum of space, exposing the crew to cosmic radiation. You can accelerate constantly, cutting the transit time down to a fraction of what it used to be.
It's just wild to think we're building engines that harness the physics of stars to push us across the solar system. And the innovations aren't just limited to deep transit either. JPL engineers also just broke the sound barrier. They surpassed Mach 1 with new rotor blades designed for future Mars helicopters.
Right, and they tested them in a vacuum chamber, simulating that incredibly thin Martian air.
Yeah. And meanwhile, down in Houston, Texas, at NASA's Johnson Space Center, Blue Origin's Mk1 Endurance uncrewed lunar lander survived some really extreme testing. And NASA is also testing regenerative fuel cells for the moon that split water into hydrogen and oxygen. There's just so much happening at once.
Well, the connective tissue between all these projects is permanence. We aren't building flags and footprints hardware anymore. I mean, take the Mars helicopter blades. The atmosphere on Mars is about 1% as dense as Earth's.
Basically a vacuum compared to here.
Right. So to generate lift in air that thin, the blades have to spin so incredibly fast that the tips break the speed of sound. But breaking the sound barrier creates massive aerodynamic stress and turbulence. Solving that means we essentially unlock low-altitude cargo transport on Mars.
That's incredible. And what about the Blue Origin Mk1 tests? From what I understand, they were specifically looking at how rocket exhaust interacts with the lunar surface.
Yeah, the lunar regolith,
Yeah.
which is, it is not like sand on a beach.
It's really sharp, right?
Yes. Because the moon has no atmosphere and no water, there's no wind or river erosion to smooth out the dirt over millions of years. The regolith is basically microscopic, razor-sharp shards of glass. Yeah, so when a descent engine fires 10 feet above the surface, it blasts this abrasive dust outward at supersonic speeds. It can completely strip the coatings off nearby habitats or just destroy the hinges on solar panels. So the tests in Houston are crucial for understanding blast radius mitigation.
Which actually leads perfectly into those fuel cells.
Yeah.
Because if you want to survive the freezing 14-day-long lunar night where temperatures drop to, what, minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Extremely cold.
You need a closed-loop system. NASA's regenerative cells use solar power during the 2 weeks of lunar daylight to undergo electrolysis, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. Then, during the 2 weeks of darkness, they recombine those elements to generate heat and electricity.
And water is the only byproduct.
Exactly. It is the ultimate off-grid survival mechanism. And it just shows how the entire aerospace industry is shifting from, exploration to infrastructure.
Infrastructure that is getting remarkably intelligent, I'd add, because we aren't just sending dumb hardware up there anymore. According to Space.com, NASA just deployed the Prithvi Geospatial AI Foundation model into orbit.
Oh, right. It's sitting on the Canini satellite and on the International Space Station, or ISS, via the Thales Alenia Space Imaginee system.
Yes, and it is specifically trained for rapid flood and cloud detection. This is a monumental shift in orbital architecture. Historically, satellites were basically just really expensive digital cameras.
They just take pictures and send them back.
Right. They would take high-resolution images of the Earth and beam these massive packets of raw data down to ground stations. Then, human analysts or ground-based supercomputers would have to crunch that data to see if a river in Bangladesh had broken its banks. The latency could literally be days.
But with Prithvi on board, the satellite is doing the thinking itself.
Exactly. It's edge computing in space. The artificial intelligence processes the visual data locally. The millisecond it takes the picture, if it detects a flood signature, it doesn't send the entire terabyte image.
It just sends the important part.
Yeah, it just beams down a tiny text alert with the exact coordinates to first responders. It totally circumvents the massive bandwidth bottleneck of space communications.
I love that. It's like upgrading from a security camera that streams 24/7 footage of your empty driveway to a smart camera that only pings your phone when it actually sees a delivery driver.
That's exactly what it is.
And speaking of the ISS, SpaceX's 34th resupply mission just docked, carrying 6,500 pounds of cargo. I was looking through the manifest, and they sent up osteoporosis bone scaffolds. They also launched the SNP-PY CubeSat, which is using tungsten-infused epoxy detectors to study solar neutrinos.
The microgravity environment of the ISS is rapidly becoming a premier biomanufacturing facility.
How so?
Well, on Earth, gravity constantly pulls on our cells. If you try to grow bone tissue in a petri dish, it just flattens out. But in microgravity, osteoblasts, the cells that form bone, they can grow in perfect three-dimensional lattice-like structures. Researchers use these scaffolds to study how bones degrade and regenerate, which is absolutely crucial for treating osteoporosis back on Earth.
And what about this SNP-PY CubeSat? Why use tungsten to study neutrinos? I thought neutrinos pass through literally everything.
They do. Neutrinos are subatomic particles produced by the nuclear fusion inside the sun. They have almost zero mass, and they don't interact with electromagnetism at all. Billions of them are passing through your body right now, completely undetected.
It's always so unsettling to think about.
Huh. Well, they only interact via the weak nuclear force. So to catch one, you need an incredibly dense material, so there's a higher statistical probability of a neutrino actually hitting an atomic nucleus. Tungsten is one of the densest metals we have.
Oh, I see.
By infusing it into an epoxy matrix on a small CubeSat, physicists are trying to map the inner core of the sun by basically catching the ghost particles it spits out.
The scale of what we're doing up there is just staggering. But, as sophisticated as our orbital tech is getting, the deep universe is still throwing us massive curveballs. For instance, the James Webb Space Telescope, or JWST, just spotted something in the Eridanus constellation about 190 light-years away that honestly shouldn't exist.
Oh, the impossible planetary pair.
Yes. Science Daily reports they found a hot Jupiter and a mini Neptune orbiting in incredibly close proximity.
Right, and this completely upends the traditional textbook model of solar system formation. The old theory assumed planets formed more or less in the orbits where we find them today.
Like rocky planets close to the star, gas giants further out.
Exactly. Rocky planets close to the star where it's warm, and gas giants further out past the frost line, where volatile gases can freeze and accrete. Finding a massive, scorching hot gas giant right next to an icy mini-Neptune so close to their host star proves that our standard model is just flawed.
So how did they get there?
Planetary migration. It suggests that early solar systems are violently chaotic. Massive planets form further out, but gravitational drag from the protoplanetary disk, or, gravitational billiards with other large planets, causes them to spiral inward toward the star.
And they just drag or toss smaller planets along the way.
Exactly. It means our own relatively stable, orderly solar system might be a really rare cosmic fluke.
That's a humbling thought. And if the planets are migrating in ways we didn't expect, it seems the very fabric holding them together is also more complex than we thought. There's a new theory making waves about dark matter. I've always been taught that dark matter is cold dark matter. This invisible, passive scaffolding that exerts gravity but otherwise doesn't interact with anything, not even itself.
Right. But this new model proposes self-interacting dark matter. What's fascinating here is that this would solve several glaring discrepancies in astrophysics. For decades, we've looked at the rotation curves of galaxies. They spin so fast that the visible matter, the stars and gas, should technically fly apart.
Right, so gravity from invisible dark matter is what holds them together.
Yes, but when we map the density of dark matter in the cores of certain galaxies, it isn't as dense as the cold dark matter model predicts it should be.
It's too spread out.
Right. But if dark matter is self-interacting, meaning its particles can actually bump into one another and scatter, kind of like billiard balls experiencing friction, it would explain why the cores are less dense.
Oh, because it pushes against itself.
The dark matter is transferring heat and kinetic energy to itself, smoothing out its own distribution. It changes dark matter from a ghostly, passive backdrop into an active, colliding substance that shapes the high-energy anomalies we see across the universe.
Wow. And as we refine our understanding of dark matter, we are also confirming the absolute extremes of gravity. The LIGO, Virgo, and Kara observatories just confirmed that the universe's biggest black holes are forged in violent mergers. This is gravitational wave astronomy, right?
Yes, laser interferometry. When two supermassive black holes orbit each other and eventually collide, the event is so cataclysmic that it actually stretches and squeezes the fabric of space-time itself.
Literally bending space.
Those ripples travel across billions of light years. The LIGO detectors in the United States and their international partners measure those actual ripples. It is a stunning, direct confirmation of Einstein's theory of general relativity.
We look billions of light years away from mysteries, but we have some incredibly weird anomalies in our own atmosphere, too. France 24 and Politico just covered a massive document dump from the U.S. Department of War. They initiated a program called Pure USU, the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP encounters.
Yes, war.gov UFO.
Exactly. You can go there right now and look at decades of top-secret files. They even released logs from the Apollo 17 crew in 1972 detailing anomalous sightings.
The sociological and political impact of this release is fascinating. The unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP conversation, has shifted drastically. For decades, it was relegated to the absolute fringes of pop culture. Now it's institutionalized.
But I want to play skeptic here for a second because I read through some of these newly unsealed files, and they are highly ambiguous.
Very much so.
There are no high-definition photos of green men in alien spacecraft. It's blurry radar data, cryptic pilot logs, heavily redacted memos. If there is no smoking gun, why is the government suddenly pushing for all this transparency? Is this a genuine shift or a narrative control thing?
Well, it really depends on the political lens you view it through, and this is where the debate gets highly polarized. From one perspective, advocates for transparency argue this is a genuine, albeit slow, democratic process. Congress demanded access, whistleblowers came forward, and the military is finally releasing what it legally can, basically acknowledging that they simply do not know what these objects are. They point to highly credible witnesses, like naval aviators, tracking objects that drop 80,000 feet in seconds without sonic booms or visible propulsion.
Which is physically impossible for our aircraft.
Right, and they use that as proof that scientific inquiry is desperately needed.
Okay, and the other perspective?
The more cynical or perhaps pragmatic viewpoint, which is often shared by critics across the political spectrum, is that this is a classic narrative control strategy. By dumping thousands of ambiguous, inconclusive files onto the internet, the government exhausts the public.
Like just flood the zone with noise.
Exactly. They comply with the letter of the transparency laws without revealing anything of strategic value. Some even argue that amplifying the UAP mystery serves as a really convenient distraction from actual terrestrial black-budget drone programs or from other pressing geopolitical failures.
Give people a blurry mystery to chase so they stop asking about the defense budget.
Precisely. But regardless of the motive, it removes the stigma. When Apollo astronauts and modern radar operators are seeing the exact same physics-defying anomalies, it demands a rigorous, non-stigmatized scientific response.
Especially since the space immediately above our heads is getting incredibly dangerous, and not because of aliens. Yahoo and Space.com reported that 2 Russian satellites just came within 10 feet, about 3 meters of each other in low Earth orbit. I had to read that twice. Wait, 10 feet, traveling at 17,000 miles per hour?
Yeah. The orbital mechanics required to execute a maneuver like that are astonishingly complex. To synchronize the orbital plane, velocity, and altitude of 2 distinct objects moving at Mach 22 to within a 10-foot margin, that requires highly advanced propulsion and autonomous guidance systems.
So this is not a clerical error in space traffic control?
Definitely not. It is an unambiguous demonstration of capability. We are seeing human geopolitics deeply militarize the orbital domain. When a satellite can cozy up to another one that closely, it implies 2 capabilities: espionage and kinetic destruction.
Wow.
It could be tapping into signals intelligence, visually inspecting sensitive hardware, or positioning itself as a direct anti-satellite weapon.
And the risk there is the Kessler syndrome, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Low Earth orbit is becoming highly congested. If a deliberate anti-satellite strike occurs, or even just an accidental collision between these incredibly close satellites, it shatters them into thousands of pieces of shrapnel.
Which then hit other satellites.
Right, creating a cascading chain reaction of debris that could theoretically render entire orbital altitudes completely unusable for generations. It would wipe out global GPS, weather tracking, and communications.
We're seeing the orbital lanes choked by the threat of human conflict. But if we look beneath our own feet, the planet itself is proving to be just as volatile. Popular Mechanics reported on what geologists are calling the Northern Appalachian Anomaly. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, scientists have tracked a giant, slow-moving mass of abnormally hot rock drifting toward New York City, New York in the United States. And the headline warned this could divide continents, which naturally sounds like the plot of a terrible disaster movie.
It does, but we have to ground this in the reality of geological time.
Right, so Manhattan isn't going to split in half during rush hour tomorrow.
No, definitely not tomorrow. What seismologists are likely looking at is a mantle plume. The Earth's crust is basically a cracked shell floating on a churning, incredibly dynamic layer of semi-solid rock called the mantle. Occasionally, a localized column of superheated magma rises from deep near the Earth's core up toward the crust.
Like a lava lamp.
A perfect analogy, yeah. As this massive bubble of heat pushes up against the underside of the North American tectonic plate, it causes the crust above it to swell, stretch, thin out, and eventually fracture.
Okay.
This is the exact geological mechanism that rifted the supercontinent of Pangaea apart hundreds of millions of years ago, which created the Atlantic Ocean.
So over the next several million years, New York could find itself on the edge of a new continental rift. It is just awe-inspiring to think about the sheer slow-motion power of the planet just doing its thing, completely indifferent to our borders or cities.
Indifferent is the key word. And sometimes that power isn't slow motion at all.
No, sometimes it is terrifyingly fast. The BBC just reported on a localized disaster that has massive global implications. A landslide near the Tracy Arm Fjord in Alaska, United States, caused the second largest megatsunami ever recorded.
The South Sawyer Glacier.
Yeah, the South Sawyer Glacier has been retreating, and without that ice holding up the mountain face, 64 million cubic meters of solid rock collapsed into the water.
The physics of a displacement wave are entirely different from a seismic tsunami. A standard tsunami is caused by an earthquake shifting the ocean floor, moving the entire water column.
Right.
But a megatsunami in a fjord is a pure kinetic energy transfer in a confined space. Imagine dropping a massive boulder into a bathtub. The water has nowhere to go but up.
And it went up. The wave stripped the trees and vegetation off the mountain slopes, a staggering 1,578 feet above sea level.
Unbelievable.
That is taller than the Empire State Building.
And it's a direct, visceral consequence of localized warming. Glaciers act as structural buttresses for steep alpine valleys. As the climate warms and the ice retreats, those rock walls lose their support. This isn't just an anomaly, it is a cascading climate feedback loop.
And we are seeing those climate cascades everywhere right now. While Alaska deals with massive ice retreats, South Asia is burning up. Our record-breaking heat wave is currently devastating India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
Yes.
And it's not just the heat. Inside Climate News pointed out a secondary cascade. The changing climate patterns are causing severe, prolonged droughts globally. Without rain to wash the atmosphere, pollen and particulate matter are stagnating in the air, exacerbating allergy and respiratory crises worldwide.
It really highlights the extreme interconnectedness of the Earth's thermodynamic system. An atmospheric blocking pattern over South Asia traps a high-pressure heat dome, preventing monsoon rains.
Which ruins the crops.
That heat disrupts agricultural cycles, puts millions at risk of heat stroke, and alters the global jet stream, which then influences weather patterns as far away as the Arctic Circle, which accelerates the glacial melt we saw in Alaska.
It feels overwhelming, but then, you read a story out of Science Daily that gives you a little bit of hope for human ingenuity. The village of Cumberland in British Columbia, Canada, has found a way to repurpose its flooded historical coal mines. They are using them to generate clean geothermal energy.
It is brilliant adaptive reuse. When a deep coal mine is abandoned, it naturally fills with groundwater. Because it is deep underground, the Earth's natural geothermal gradient heats that water.
Oh,
Cumberland is pumping that geothermally heated water to the surface, running it through heat exchangers to warm municipal buildings and generate baseline power, and then circulating the cooled water back down into the mine shafts to be heated again.
They are literally using the rusted infrastructure of our dirty energy past to pull clean energy out of the ground. That is incredible. And it's fascinating what else we pull out of the ground when we start digging. Popular Mechanics had an amazing piece on archaeologists working in a vast desert region. They uncovered a network of 6,000-year-old Neolithic burial monuments.
The animal burials.
Yeah. But the stunning part is that inside these tombs, they found human remains buried intricately alongside cattle remains.
This profoundly shifts our understanding of early agrarian societies. Tend to think of the domestication of animals purely in economic terms. A shift from hunting to farming for reliable protein.
Right. Cows are just food or plows.
Exactly. But burying cattle alongside humans in monumental architecture 6 millennia ago implies a deep, complex spiritual bond.
The cattle weren't just food. They were sacred companions.
Exactly. They represented survival, wealth, and status, to the point where they were deemed necessary for the journey into the afterlife. It shows a level of reverence for the natural world that our ancient ancestors held, which we honestly often overlook.
I love when history surprises us like that. Over in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, a farmer found what he thought was just a piece of old, mundane metal wire in the dirt. It turned out to be part of a massive Viking silver treasure hoard. We're talking heavy ingots and highly intricate jewelry.
And the origin of that silver is the key.
Right. The kicker is that the silver had Byzantine markings.
The presence of Byzantine silver in a Scottish field fundamentally rewrites the popular narrative of the Viking Age. Pop culture depicts Vikings solely as bloodthirsty raiders in longships pillaging monasteries.
The guy with the horn helmet swinging an axe.
Ah, exactly. While raiding certainly happened, this hoard proves they were also master logisticians and global merchants.
So they were basically running a medieval supply chain.
They navigated the river systems of Eastern Europe, crossed the Black Sea, and established complex, high-value trade routes directly into the heart of the Byzantine and Islamic empires. They were connecting northern Europe to the Middle East centuries before the Renaissance.
But history isn't just ancient Neolithic monuments and Viking silver. Sometimes the history we unearth is still bleeding into our modern politics. Marine archaeologists using advanced sonar and robotic submersibles just located 2 shipwrecks from World War II lost in 1943, the American submarine USS Grampus and the Japanese transport Koryu Umaru.
The sonar technology used today allows us to map the seafloor with unprecedented millimeter precision.
It's amazing.
Finding these wrecks brings closure to the families of the sailors, but it also provides stark physical evidence of the vast global reach of the Pacific theater.
And while those wrecks rest in the ocean, the soil of Europe is still giving up its dead. During a construction project in Potsdam, Germany, the remains of 80 Soviet soldiers from World War II were uncovered and reburied. RT reported on this because it sparked a very intense, modern debate. A former member of the European Parliament criticized a German ban on displaying Soviet WWII symbols, calling the ban discrimination.
We are moving into some heavily contested geopolitical territory here, and I think it's crucial we look at the mechanics of these debates as neutral observers.
Absolutely. Our goal today isn't to take a political stance or endorse a side, but to look at how these historical narratives are weaponized in the modern day.
Exactly. Because the situation in Potsdam encapsulates the deeply fractured memory of the Eastern Front. To the political left, and particularly from the Russian perspective, symbols like the hammer and sickle, or the St. George's ribbon, represent the immense, bloody sacrifice of the Red Army that liberated Europe from Nazi fascism.
Right.
Erasing those symbols is seen as historical revisionism.
But for many in Germany and across Eastern Europe,
Right, from the perspective of many Eastern European nations and conservative voices, the arrival of the Red Army didn't bring liberation. It brought decades of brutal totalitarian communist occupation.
so it's completely different framing.
Yes. Banning those symbols is viewed as a necessary defense of modern democratic values against authoritarian iconography. The bones of those 80 soldiers force modern Germany to navigate a diplomatic tightrope between honoring the dead and condemning the regime they fought for.
And speaking of geopolitical tightropes, the global board right now is just vibrating with tension. Let's look at the Middle East and the massive economic ripple effects impacting all of us. CNBC, AP News, and the BBC are all tracking the complex dynamic between the United States and Iran.
And the markets are reacting wildly.
The U.S. stock market just surged. The Dow Jones Industrial Average shot up 500 points, and tech hardware stocks like Advanced Micro Devices or AMD hit record highs.
Market surge was driven almost entirely by optimism over rumors of a potential U.S.-Iran peace deal.
Right. And as a result, global crude oil prices dropped. But the rhetoric coming from the White House is incredibly aggressive. U.S. President Donald Trump publicly threatened a much higher level of bombing if Iran refuses to transfer its highly enriched uranium out of the country.
Yes.
He explicitly stated that it is too early for direct talks, even while his administration acknowledges reports of great progress behind the scenes.
This is a textbook execution of coercive diplomacy, often referred to as maximum pressure. By threatening severe military escalation publicly while simultaneously allowing back-channel negotiations regarding uranium enrichment to progress, the Trump administration aims to force Iran into a weaker negotiating posture.
Okay.
The political right often lauds this strategy as the only language hardline regimes understand, arguing that credible military threats prevent nuclear proliferation.
And the counter-argument to that strategy?
Critics on the political left and many international diplomats argue this brinkmanship is reckless. They suggest that tearing up previous diplomatic frameworks and relying on military threats isolates the U.S. from its European allies and risks triggering a regional war through miscalculation.
But the markets seem to love the possibility of a resolution, even a forced one.
Because the markets despise uncertainty. The Strait of Hormuz is the choke point for a massive percentage of the world's daily oil supply. If tensions spike, insurance premiums for oil tankers skyrocket, and the cost of energy goes up globally.
Making everything more expensive.
When oil prices dropped on the peace deal rumors, it acted like an immediate tax cut for the global economy, freeing up capital that rapidly flowed into high-growth sectors like tech and semiconductors, hence the AMD surge.
But the friction leading up to this has already done real damage. Because of the ongoing instability and wildly fluctuating jet fuel prices, airlines were forced to cut 13,000 flights globally in the month of May alone.
13,000.
There are even serious proposals to start using U.S.-grade jet fuel in European markets just to ease the logistical shortages. And the most cynical part of all of this? Financial watchdogs are pointing to highly organized insider trading rings.
Oh, the futures trading.
Yes, people are making massive profits on oil futures and cryptocurrency bets by predicting the exact cadence of this geopolitical conflict.
It is the financialization of warfare. Highly sophisticated actors, sometimes state-sponsored, are analyzing troop movements, satellite imagery, and diplomatic rhetoric to execute algorithmic trades. If you know a hardline speech is coming tomorrow, you go long on oil futures today. You monetize the geopolitical anxiety.
And the anxiety is more than justified when you look at the kinetic reality on the ground. Al Jazeera and Yahoo cover the ongoing cascading violence in the region. Israeli forces bombed the southern suburb of Beirut, Lebanon.
A targeted strike.
They specifically targeted Malek Balou, a high-ranking commander of Hezbollah's Radwan force. At roughly the same time, an Israeli airstrike in Gaza City in the Gaza Strip critically wounded Azam al-Haya, the son of a prominent Hamas leader.
From a military mechanics perspective, these are highly coordinated decapitation strikes. Targeting the Radwan force in Lebanon, which is Hezbollah's elite special operations unit, is a preemptive strategy to degrade their command structure near the northern Israeli border.
Right.
Similarly, targeting the family members of Hamas leadership in Gaza is designed to exert overwhelming psychological and organizational pressure. The Israeli perspective is that these strikes are essential, precise counterterrorism operations necessary to dismantle existential threats.
But the civilian toll and the blockade are drawing immense international scrutiny. UN News reported that the UN Human Rights Office is publicly urging Israel to release two activists, Saif Abukashek and Tiago de Avila. They were part of the global Sumud flotilla, and they were detained in international waters while attempting to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza.
This incident really highlights the profound friction between military security blockades and international maritime law. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, governs international waters.
So they were outside territorial waters.
Yes. The flotilla organizers argue they have a legal and moral right to deliver civilian aid to a besieged population. Israel argues that maintaining a strict naval blockade is a legal and necessary military measure to prevent weapons smuggling to militant groups.
It is an incredibly volatile situation where legal frameworks constantly collide with the harsh realities of asymmetric warfare. And that friction isn't isolated to the Middle East either. It feels like every border, every historical alliance is being stress-tested right now.
It's global.
Let's look at the other global fault lines. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine has rapidly developed a multi-layered system of battlefield control. They are integrating physical trenches with incredibly advanced drone and sensor technology.
It is a bizarre, grim synthesis of eras. You have the mud and physical fortifications of World War I, but the trench lines are being managed by 21st century software, thermal optics, and autonomous strike drones. It represents a fundamental evolution in how ground wars are fought.
Meanwhile, Russia scaled down its Victory Day parade in Moscow for the first time in 20 years, and both sides are actively accusing each other of breaching a holiday ceasefire.
The scaling down of the Victory Day parade is a highly significant domestic signal. It suggests severe logistical strains on military hardware and a potential shift in the Kremlin's domestic messaging, perhaps acknowledging the protracted, grinding nature of the conflict.
Over in Asia, the maritime friction continues. The Philippines Coast Guard just accused a Chinese vessel of conducting illegal marine scientific research near the gas-rich Reed Bank in the South China Sea.
The South China Sea is one of the most vital shipping lanes on Earth. China claims nearly the entire sea based on historical maps, while the Philippines relies on the UNCLOS framework, which grants them an exclusive economic zone.
So what's the goal of a research vessel?
Sending a scientific research vessel is a classic gray zone tactic. It asserts presence and probes resource deposits without firing a shot, basically daring the Philippines to escalate.
It seems like the great powers are constantly pushing the boundaries, and Europe is trying to build a fortress against it. The European Union, the EU, is actively aiming to enlarge by admitting 9 new member countries.
EU enlargement is a defensive geopolitical reflex right now. By absorbing nations in Eastern Europe and the Balkans into the economic and political bloc, Brussels hopes to stabilize its periphery and insulate those nations from external influence, particularly from Russia.
But while Europe expands outward, it is fighting intense battles internally. Germany just executed a massive 600-officer police crackdown on a youth neo-Nazi network called Deutsche Jugendverein.
It demonstrates that modern liberal democracies are fighting a two-front war. They are trying to secure their external borders while simultaneously combating radicalized, highly networked, tech-savvy domestic extremism.
And even established democracies in Asia are feeling the strain. In South Korea, an appeals court just reduced the prison term of former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo down to 15 years. This is all fallout from President Yoon Suk-yeol's brief, chaotic declaration of martial law.
That entire saga illustrates both the fragility and the resilience of democratic institutions.
Oh, so?
Well, a sitting president attempting to bypass constitutional norms via martial law is a profound stress test. The fact that the courts are now processing the legal fallout shows that the institutional guardrails held, but the severe sentences reflect how close the system came to breaking.
We are stretching the limits of our institutions everywhere. But for our final topic today, we are going to look inward. We are exploring the absolute frontier of biology, where we are tracking deadly pathogens and simultaneously perhaps curing aging itself. The BBC, Forbes, and CBS News all reported on a terrifying outbreak aboard the MV Hondius cruise ship. A severe cluster of the Andes strain of Hantavirus hit the passengers. 3 people died, and 3 critically ill patients were evacuated to the Canary Islands in Spain, despite massive local opposition.
The local opposition in the Canary Islands is understandable, given the trauma of the last few years, but the global health response here is actually a masterclass in modern epidemiology.
Okay, let me stop you there, because when I hear deadly virus on a cruise ship, I immediately have flashbacks to 2020.
Yeah, I think we all do.
People trapped in cabins, ports refusing entry. Is the global health community overreacting with this massive tracing effort, or is this Andes strain a genuine threat?
The response is entirely proportionate to the unique pathology of the Andes strain. Most hantaviruses, like the Sentinels virus in the American Southwest, are zoonotic spillover events. A human inhales aerosolized particles from infected rodent droppings, usually while sweeping out a shed or, in the case of the suspected index patients on this cruise, birdwatching near a rural landfill in Argentina.
So the human gets sick, but they can't cough on someone and pass it along. It's a dead-end host.
Exactly. But the Andes strain is the terrifying exception. It is the only known hantavirus that has demonstrated sustained human-to-human transmission.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it causes hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, which has an incredibly high fatality rate as the lungs fill with fluid. So a human-to-human transmissible virus with a high mortality rate on a confined cruise ship with shared ventilation is the absolute worst-case scenario for epidemiologists.
Okay, so the panic is warranted. And right now, there is a global scramble to track down every passenger who disembarked before the quarantine. They are tracking people down in Texas, in the United States, and finding self-isolating Britons in the UK.
It isn't panic, though. It is precision. The fact that health agencies identified the specific strain, secured specialized biocontainment units in Spain, and managed to trace passenger manifests across multiple continents in a matter of days is a testament to drastically improved post-pandemic global health infrastructure.
They actually know what they're doing now.
They are executing the exact containment protocols we all wished existed years ago.
That actually makes me feel much better. We are getting better at fighting off death. But here is where it gets truly mind-blowing. We might be learning how to rewind the clock entirely. Popular Mechanics reported that researchers at Harvard University have successfully reprogrammed human cells to a youthful state. They use something called Yamanaka factors to manipulate the epigenetic alterations that cause aging.
This is one of the most profound biological breakthroughs of our century. To understand it, we need to completely redefine what aging actually is.
Wait, are we talking to biological immortality? Are we going to live forever?
Well, we need to distinguish between lifespan and healthspan.
Yeah.
You can still be hit by a car. But to understand the science, think of your body as a computer. Your DNA, the genome, is the hardware. It is the fixed physical blueprint.
Right.
But the epigenome is the software. It's a system of chemical tags, like methylation, that sits on top of the DNA and tells the cell which genes to turn on and which to turn off. It tells a skin cell to act like skin and a heart cell to beat.
So what goes wrong when we age?
As we encounter environmental stress over decades, UV radiation, pollution, poor diet, viral infections, that epigenetic software gets corrupted. The tags get placed in the wrong spots. The cells literally forget their original programming.
Like a glitchy computer?
Exactly. They stop dividing and enter a zombie-like state called cellular senescence. They refuse to die, and instead they sit there secreting inflammatory chemicals that degrade all the healthy tissue around them.
So aging isn't necessarily our hardware breaking down. It's a software glitch accumulating over decades.
That is exactly it. And the Yamanaka factors, which are 4 specific proteins discovered by Nobel laureate Shinya Yamanaka, act like a system reset button. The Harvard team figured out how to safely apply these factors to adult human cells.
And it resets the software.
Yes, it clears out the corrupted epigenetic software, erasing the senescence, but it stops just short of wiping the hard drive completely, so the cell doesn't lose its identity.
So a heart cell remembers it's a heart cell. It just acts like a 20-year-old heart cell again.
Precisely. They successfully rebound the biological clock of the cell. This paves the way for regenerative medicine that doesn't just treat the symptoms of aging, but addresses the root cause.
Wow.
Imagine reversing the tissue degradation of Alzheimer's, regenerating optic nerves to cure blindness, or giving an 80-year-old the resilient, high-functioning organ capacity of a young adult. It fundamentally changes the human experience.
It changes everything. Economics, retirement, social structures.
Yeah.
If we extend the human health span by decades, the entire parameters of our society have to shift. Which honestly brings us to a perfect synthesis of everything we've covered today.
It's all connected.
The sheer scale of human endeavor right now is breathtaking. We are pushing outward into the absolute limits of the cosmos, building deep space engines powered by plasma hotter than lava, deploying artificial intelligence to think for us in orbit, and studying the charred, violent scars of spacecraft to pave our way to Mars.
We really are.
We are rewriting the textbooks on astrophysics, discovering migrating planets, colliding dark matter, and capturing the ripples of merging black holes. We watch the government unseal the strange, ambiguous history of unidentified phenomena while tracking very real, very dangerous Russian satellites dancing in low Earth orbit.
A lot of friction up there.
And we look down at the volatile planet beneath our feet, tracking a slow-motion plume of magma rising under New York and witnessing the terrifying instant devastation of a 1,500-foot megatsunami in Alaska driven by a warming climate.
The climate cascades.
We saw the ingenuity of pulling clean geothermal heat from flooded coal mines in Canada. We dug into the dirt to find ancient cattle buried as spiritual companions, unearthed Byzantine silver in Scotland that rewrites the Viking economy, and confronted the ghosts of World War II in the shipwrecks of the Pacific and the controversial graves of Potsdam.
History's always right beneath the surface.
It is. And we navigated the incredibly fragile, high-stakes tightropes of global geopolitics, from the financial shockwaves of the U.S. and Iran to the tragic, complex blockades and airstrikes in the Middle East. We saw the drone trenches of Ukraine, the gray zone maritime tactics in the South China Sea, and the stress tests of democracy from German police raids to South Korean courtrooms.
And then the biology.
Yes, finally we looked inward at the very code of our existence. We watched a synchronized global dragnet trace a deadly, transmissible hantavirus across continents, and we stared into the petri dishes at Harvard where the epigenetic software of human aging is literally being rewritten.
It is a staggering amount of evolution happening simultaneously on all fronts. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
We now possess the biological knowledge to hit the reset button on our own cellular aging. We are engineering the magnetic plasma thrusters that will carry humanity across the void to the red dust of Mars. We are peering into the hearts of galaxies and deploying AI sentinels above the clouds.
Yeah.
But when you look at the geopolitical map we just outlined, the trenches, the blockades, the orbital brinkmanship, the frantic zero-sum scrambling for power and resources, it reframes the challenge of our century.
How so?
The ultimate question isn't whether our technology, our hardware will survive the future. The question is whether our collective wisdom can evolve fast enough to safely wield the godlike tools we have built.
That truly is the ultimate test. Wisdom versus our own brilliant, terrifying inventions. Thank you all for joining us on this massive journey today. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking up at the stars, and keep examining the ground beneath your feet. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. If a massive earthquake hits a major metropolis, you don't really judge the city's survival by staring at, like, cracks in the sidewalk. You look at the skyscrapers.
Right.
And if they're swaying violently but they actually remain standing, well, the structural engineering worked exactly as intended. And today, a massive geopolitical earthquake is ripping through the Strait of Hormuz.
It really is.
Yep.
We're looking at the profound, really global macroeconomic fallout of this escalating military conflict between the United States and Iran. And of course, alongside that, we have the impending U.S.-brokered peace negotiations, which are currently being dubbed Project Freedom.
Right, and I think the central question we really have to answer today is whether that global U.S.-led economic skyscraper is just, swaying by design, or if the foundation itself is irreversibly fracturing beneath our feet, which is a very real possibility.
Exactly. Because right now, gas prices are surging globally, flights are grounded everywhere, and these alternative global powers are essentially circling.
So we are taking a truly planetary perspective today. We're not just looking at Washington or London, but how this shockwave actually travels through Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And, well, my perspective is that this current crisis actually demonstrates that the U.S.-led global economic structure remains fundamentally unshakable.
Unshakable? Really?
Yes, unshakable. Because if you look at the extraordinary reaction of global markets and just the enduring diplomatic leverage of the West right now, it proves the system is highly capable of absorbing severe geopolitical shocks without collapsing.
Well, in my perspective is that the weaponization of these global trade routes and the cascading energy crises we are seeing right now in the developing world, they've permanently shattered Western credibility. This conflict is creating a massive geopolitical vacuum, and a multipolar coalition led by China and Russia and, increasingly joined by an independent global South is rapidly filling that vacuum.
Well, let's start by looking at the hard financial data. Because from a market-driven perspective, the resilience of the U.S.-led hegemony is kind of undeniable. I mean, look at the extraordinary reaction of the global markets just this week.
I'm looking at it.
The Dow surged by 600 points. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq, they both hit fresh record highs. I mean, just the mere hopes for this U.S.-brokered Project Freedom peace deal. The U.S. is entirely dictating the terms here.
But
They're demanding resolutions on the Strait of Hormuz before even tackling broader nuclear issues.
you're looking at financial abstractions, right?
Hold on, let me just finish this thought. Because it's not just abstractions. Western corporations are successfully navigating this exact crisis. I mean, Shell just reported a massive $6.92 billion profit for the first quarter.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right? And for anyone wondering how a company makes billions during a crisis, it's because of the geopolitical risk premium on oil. Oil is traded on futures, so the mere anticipation of a supply shortage drives up the immediate spot price, and that allows companies with existing reserves to sell at a massive markup.
Sure, but
To me, this proves the system works exactly as designed. It punishes geopolitical disruptors while rewarding market agility and established capital structures. The foundations of global finance haven't cracked. They've just, dynamically repriced the risk.
wait. But that Wall Street exuberance you're praising, it is entirely divorced from reality on the ground. You have to look at the physical economy, not just a financial one.
Okay, what do you mean by physical economy in this context?
Take the global aviation shock we are currently experiencing. Soaring jet fuel prices have forced the cancellation of, 13,000 flights globally?
Yeah, it's been a mess.
It's more than a mess. It led directly to the collapse of Spirit Airlines in North America. The CEO of AirZaya is explicitly warning that this crisis is, quote, worse than COVID for the transportation sector.
Look, those are isolated sector impacts, though.
They aren't isolated if you live outside of the financial sector. I mean, while Western oil giants like Shell are posting those record billions in profit you just mentioned, regular people are facing gas prices jumping past $4.50 a gallon in the U.S.
Which hurts, absolutely.
And it's worse globally. Developing nations like Nigeria are facing severe, literally paralyzing energy grid failures. My position is that unilateral U.S.-Israeli military actions have destroyed the post-Cold War international order.
Destroyed is a strong word.
But look at the pain being inflicted on the global South. It's driving nations to actively decouple from Western reliance just to ensure their own basic survival.
Okay, but if I'm listening to this at home, I might be thinking, how does a crisis in the Middle East make an American tech index more valuable? Because that's where we see the biggest gains.
Right.
The financial system is the nervous system of the physical economy.
The fact that tech stocks like AMD are surging and oil prices are already retreating based purely on the progress of an Iran deal, that shows the capital is smart. Investors look at a conflict in the Middle East and they think, well, a war can shut down an oil pipeline, but it can't shut down AI cloud processing.
Exactly. They retreat to fantasy.
No, it's a massive flight to non-physical assets. That's market efficiency, not detachment. Capital calculates the duration of the disruption, and it is currently signaling that the West will successfully impose order.
I have to push back hard on that. Because frankly, you can't eat a microchip.
Well, obviously.
And you can't power a cargo ship with cloud computing. When you have capital cheering for a peace deal that hasn't even been signed, while physical supply chains are literally broken, that is a symptom of a hyper-financialized economy. It completely ignores human cost.
I think it's just pricing it in differently.
Look at the warnings coming from outside the Western bubble, though. Kremlin envoy Kirill Dmitriev recently warned that the U.S.-Israeli actions in Iran could trigger global food shortages and energy lockdowns. We are talking about a systemic freeze of agricultural logistics.
Right, the shipping issues.
Exactly. You need diesel to run tractors in Brazil. You need shipping lanes to move grain out of the Black Sea. The financial system isn't pricing instability. It's ignoring incredible fragility because a few corporations are monopolizing those risk premiums you mentioned earlier.
Okay, I see why you frame it that way. But think about how a market prices in odds. Isn't the global stock market acting like a massive insurance actuary?
How so?
Well, the fact that the financial system can process a kinetic conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, which is arguably the world's most critical energy choke point, and immediately rally on the framework of Project Freedom, that proves the structural foundation of the economy is sound.
I just don't see it.
A truly fragile system would have seen a total liquidity freeze, bank runs across Europe, and a total collapse in global equities. Instead, what did we see? Capital rotated out of vulnerable sectors, absorbed the shock, and kept the lights on.
It absorbed the shock for investors in New York and London. But for a small business owner in Southeast Asia or, a commuter in Latin America, the building didn't just sway, the roof caved in.
It's certainly a tough cycle for emerging markets.
It's economic devastation. The cost of living crisis triggered by fuel spikes isn't a minor fluctuation. The structural engineering you're praising was specifically designed to protect the penthouse while the lower floors flood. And that dynamic, that inequality of suffering, is exactly why the geopolitical foundation of this entire system is crumbling.
Okay, you can point to Wall Street rebounding all you want, but I agree that financial shock absorbers don't matter if the actual trade routes are on fire. So let's look at the actual water, right? The alliances securing these physical routes. Because from where I sit, the West is still very much the ultimate guarantor of global security.
But the global perception of that security has irrevocably changed. Former Indian envoy Talmiz Ahmad explicitly stated recently that Western credibility is, quote, crumbling into barbarism.
Yeah, that was a shocking statement.
It is incredibly strong language from a seasoned diplomat of the world's largest democracy. And because of that perceived barbarism and instability, alternative powers are moving in. China is utilizing this energy shortage to boost its influence across Asia and really tighten its grip on Africa through its digital Silk Road.
Unpack that a bit for me, though. How does a digital initiative help bypass physical trade bottlenecks?
It's about building an entirely alternative ecosystem. They want to bypass Western financial plumbing. Take the SWIFT banking system.
The messaging network.
Right. SWIFT is basically the global messaging network banks use to move money across borders. Right now, if the U.S. decides it doesn't like what you're doing, it can essentially unplug your central bank from that server.
As we've seen them do.
Exactly. So China's digital Silk Road involves laying physical submarine cables, building separate telecommunications infrastructure, and establishing digital currency clearinghouses in the global south.
Right.
By doing this, they ensure that if the U.S. ever tries to freeze their assets or block their trade, the financial plumbing is entirely out of Western hands. Furthermore, if you look at Russia and China right now, their strategic posture is to prioritize internal stability over getting dragged into peripheral conflicts. They are playing a long game while the U.S. just burns through its diplomatic capital policing the Middle East.
See, I think that fundamentally misinterprets how global security operates in practice.
Really?
Yeah. The West isn't just issuing diplomatic statements or burning capital. It is actively policing the globe to keep trade lanes open for everyone. And that includes Beijing.
I mean, they're trying.
Look at the physical deployments right now. France has deployed an aircraft carrier to the Hormuz Strait to secure maritime trade. The U.S. is leveraging its immense economic power to force trade deals, even issuing ultimatums to the EU to align on broader geopolitical fronts. The muscle of the post-Cold War order is very much active.
Sure, deploying an aircraft carrier is a massive display of hard power, but it's a reactive measure to a crisis the West helped create. China doesn't need to park an aircraft carrier in the Strait of Hormuz right now because they are utilizing economic statecraft.
Okay, but
They are securing long-term resource contracts across Latin America, building that infrastructure in Africa. They operate completely independently of Western maritime choke points.
But are they really independent? I mean, you frame China's resource maneuvering as a sign of U.S. decline, but aren't they just scavenging in a neighborhood they don't actually police?
Scavenging?
Yeah. China's top priority is keeping the oil flowing through Hormuz because they rely on the security umbrella provided by the very U.S. hegemony you claim is dying. China imports massive amounts of energy from the Middle East.
They do.
Right. If the U.S. and its European allies weren't enforcing the freedom of navigation, literally spending billions of taxpayer dollars to keep those shipping lanes safe, China's export-driven economy would grind to a halt in weeks. They are a free rider on the American security apparatus, not a replacement for it.
Well, that assumes China is content with that arrangement. Have you considered that China's reliance on that specific sea route is exactly what they are working night and day to dismantle?
I mean, they're trying.
They are succeeding. Their overland pipelines from Russia, their Belt and Road initiatives stretching through Central Asia, these are all explicit mechanisms to bypass Hormuz entirely in the future. They know they are incredibly vulnerable while the U.S. holds the keys to the strait. But the more the U.S. weaponizes that access, the faster China and the rest of the world, frankly, builds workarounds. It's a self-defeating strategy for the West.
Which actually brings up a really fascinating dynamic. China's desperate need for Middle Eastern oil juxtaposed with the West's control of the sea lanes. It exposes a critical vulnerability that affects everyone, and that is the global addiction to fossil fuels.
Completely agree.
This conflict is essentially forcing the rest of the planet to actively try and escape this trap. And, ironically, I see this as another triumph of the global market.
Triumph is a very generous word.
Well, the global south is actively decoupling to survive the West's wars. Just look at India. The Indian government was just forced to roll out an emergency economic measure called ECLGS 5.0.
And just for those unfamiliar, how exactly does that work?
So it stands for the Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme. Basically, the Indian government had to step in and guarantee $2 billion in loans just to keep their micro, small, and medium enterprises, the mom-and-pop shops, and their domestic airlines from going bankrupt overnight.
Right, because of the fuel spikes.
Exactly. Because fuel costs skyrocketed due to the Hormuz disruption. That is domestic, sovereign capital being burned simply to shield their economy from Western geopolitical fallout. And furthermore, the Global South is explicitly demanding to, quote, hold the pen on the global fossil fuel transition.
Which makes sense. Yes, they are refusing to let Western powers dictate global climate policy at these summits, while those same powers simultaneously cause global oil shocks through military brinksmanship.
But if we look at the results, the crisis is actually driving a highly successful market-led green transition. The economic friction you're describing, that's the catalyst for innovation.
It's panic.
No, because of the spike in gas and oil prices, we are seeing a massive surge in demand for solar panels and heat pumps across Europe. The market is naturally pricing fossil fuels out, and consumers are responding rationally by adopting green technology. We even see reports that India's military is shifting to green energy options directly because of the Iran war.
Right.
So, connect those dots for us. If the Indian military is adopting green energy because oil prices are spiking, isn't that just basic economics? That's not a geopolitical rebellion against the West. That's just price signals driving technological innovation.
It is a transition driven by sheer panic and survival instinct, not some smooth market-led self-correction. When the Indian military shifts to green energy, it's not because they suddenly care about carbon emissions.
No, of course not.
It's a national security imperative. They realize they cannot trust the global oil supply chain anymore. The push for solar panels and heat pumps in Europe isn't just environmentalism either. It's a desperate attempt to achieve energy sovereignty.
Right, to get off Russian and Middle Eastern gas.
Because the current system has proven to be a weapon that can be turned against them at any moment. When the Global South says they want to hold the pen, it means they no longer trust the traditional institutions. The IMF, the World Bank, the Western-led climate summits, they don't trust them to look out for their interests.
But when a resource becomes expensive and risky to transport, human beings innovate. It happened during the oil shocks of the 1970s, right? Which gave us massive leaps in energy efficiency. And it's happening right now.
That's true.
The fact that this innovation is happening globally, facilitated by international trade in solar components and battery tech, proves the interconnected global market is functioning exactly as it should. It processes the geopolitical pain and produces a technological solution.
But look at the underlying mechanics of that solution. Who controls the supply chains for those solar panels and batteries?
China.
China.
China controls the processing of rare earth minerals, the manufacturing of the photovoltaic cells, and the production of the batteries. So the, quote, rational market response to Western military instability in the Middle East is driving the Global South directly into the economic arms of Beijing.
Okay, that's a fair point.
That is the very definition of a shifting geopolitical paradigm. The transition to green energy is happening, yes, but the architecture of that new green world is not being built by the United States. It's being built by a multipolar coalition that is frankly sick of being collateral damage in conflicts over the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, that implies a level of deep cohesion in this multipolar coalition that the facts just don't support. China and India have deep structural border disputes.
They do.
They are strategic rivals in the Indo-Pacific. To suggest they are seamlessly uniting into a new bloc against the West ignores the immense friction within the Global South itself. The US and Europe still hold the dominant positions in advanced technology design, global finance, and aggregate consumer demand. You can't just wish away the internal contradictions of this supposed anti-Western alliance.
They don't need to be best friends to be aligned in their desire to bypass Western choke points, though. Their shared interest isn't necessarily mutual love. It's mutual risk mitigation.
Risk mitigation, right.
When a country like Nigeria, which is an oil producer itself, suffers an energy crisis because global shipping logistics are thrown into chaos by a conflict halfway across the world, the lesson learned isn't we need more Western naval security. The lesson is we need localized, resilient systems that the West cannot touch. That's the permanent fracturing of the foundation I'm talking about. They are building lifeboats while the West focuses on the penthouse.
Well, as we draw our discussion to a close today, it's clear we are looking at the exact same events through vastly different structural lenses.
Definitely.
To summarize my perspective, the current crisis, while undeniably painful in certain sectors like aviation, ultimately proves the unmatched resilience of the global market. Capital has rapidly repriced risk. Equities have reached record highs on the prospect of project freedom, and Western corporations have dynamically adapted.
More importantly, the indispensable nature of Western diplomatic and military power remains the only real force capable of enforcing stability in physical global choke points like Hormuz. The system is bending, yes, but it is fundamentally holding the world together.
And, well, to summarize my view, the temporary stock market highs in New York cannot hide the permanent damage done to international trust on a planetary scale.
Right.
The physical economic devastation felt by the developing world, from grounded airlines to sovereign debt crises to food shortage warnings, it has accelerated a realization that reliance on a U.S.-led order is a massive strategic liability. We are watching the rapid emergence of a multipolar world, led by opportunistic rivals who are actively offering the Global South alternatives to Western financial and energy hegemony.
But I do think we have found a critical point of convergence today amidst the disagreement. We both agree that this conflict in the Strait of Hormuz has irrevocably altered the calculus of global energy security.
Absolutely.
Whether you believe it's driven by rational market price signals or a desperate geopolitical desire for sovereignty, the transition toward renewable energy has been permanently accelerated. Nations are desperately seeking immunity from these kinds of geopolitical choke points.
Yeah, the era of unquestioned reliance on the old oil order is over. The motivation to escape the fossil fuel trap is now universally recognized as an issue of national survival, not just, domestic environmental policy.
And this highlights the immense value of analyzing world events from a planetary perspective, rather than a strictly regional one. The source material we've drawn from today contains so much more to explore regarding the unraveling of the post-Cold War international order, the future of global diplomacy, and the technological leaps born of crisis.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. So we leave it to you, the listener, to decide which paradigm will ultimately define the decades to come. Think back to that skyscraper and the earthquake. As the ground continues to shake and the global markets rapidly reprice the odds of survival, the real question isn't just whether the building survives today. It's who will hold the lease on the penthouse tomorrow.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.